Friday, we solved quadratic equations by square root method. Today, we're going to work on solving equations by factoring. That's what it says, anyway. So we've been working on factoring for the last couple weeks. Now we're going to work on, okay, now instead of it being an expression, now again, we're going to set it equal to 0, factor, and then use what we call the zero product property to help us solve. So obviously our whole goal today is to be able to solve equations by factoring. In order to do that, the first thing we have to talk about is what we call the zero product property. And again, this is just a kind of a reteach-ish type of situation. You would have done this in 9th grade quite a bit when you're doing quadratics. Essentially what the zero product property says. By definition, the zero product property says if you have A times B is equal to 0. So x minus 10 plus x minus 10 times x plus 3 equals 0. If that's the case, then either A has to equal 0 or B has to be 0. One of those two things has to happen. Okay. So if I let x minus 10 be my A value and x plus 3 be my B value, the zero product property says that either A has to equal 0, so if A is x minus 10, either x minus 10 has to equal 0 or B has to be 0, x plus 3 equals 0. And if either of those things happen, then I have a true statement. So now you just solve both sides for x. So we add 10 to both sides. So you get x is equal to 10. That's one of my solutions. Or subtract 3 from both sides. X is equal to negative 3. So if my x value is equal to either of those things, then I have a true statement. And if x is 10, that would give me 10 minus 10 times 10 plus 3. 10 minus 10 is 0. 10 plus 3 is 13. 0 times 13 is 0. So that works. If x is negative 3, that gives me negative 3 minus 10 times negative 3 plus 3. That's negative 13 times 0. That equals 0 as well. So both of those then become our solutions with the zero product property. So we set each part that's inside of the parentheses, you set each of those parts equal to 0. And if there's like 3 or 4 or 7 different things going on, one of the terms is a variable, you set it equal to 0. So if there's 7 things going on up there, you set all 7 of them equal to 0. And then those things become your zeros. Because I could put, instead of AB, I could put A times B times C equals 0. Then A has to be 0, B could be 0, or C could be 0. And they would be your solutions. Okay? And that's called the zero product property. So that leads to kind of this one. As long as it has a variable in it, in that term, then you can set it equal to 0. So if we have 2x times x minus 5 equals 0, I can let this 2x equal my A and the 3x minus 5 equal my B value. And because that term has a variable in it, I'm going to set it equal to 0. So 2x equals 0 or 3x minus 5 is equal to 0. Divide by 2, x equals 0. That's a solution. Okay, a lot of people make the mistake of saying, well, that means there's no solution. No, the solution's 0. Okay, it's just 0. Or add 5 to both sides. You get 3x equals 5. Divide by 3. You get x equals 5/3. So those are my two solutions for that equation, 2x times 3x minus 5. Just set each of the terms, if it has a variable, set it equal to 0. If there's not a variable involved, Say I had something like 2 times 3x plus 4 equals 0. This part doesn't have a variable involved, doesn't have a letter. So I don't have to set that part equal to 0 because there's nothing I'm going to substitute in there. I only need to set the 3x plus 4 equal to 0. Only the parts that have a variable involved need to have that 0. So x would be negative 4/3. In this case, it's not an either or. That's linear. That's not a quadratic. It's just linear. So that's the zero product property. So the part that we're going to work on today then was we're going to work on, okay, we're going to factor to solve. So we're going to solve the equation x squared minus 4x minus 5 is equal to 0. So now it has an equal sign. So that means it's an equation. So that means we need to find the value of x to make this work. Now when we're dealing with quadratics, meaning it's squared, the first thing, especially if we're factoring, something like a of x squared plus bx plus c equals 0. When you have those three terms, set it equal to 0 first. When you have an a, b, and a c, the first thing you want to do is make sure it's equal to 0. So this one's equal to 0. Now we've got a trinomial, so that means we're going to try to factor it. So we're going to use the x method to factor it. So from last week, a times c goes on the top. So that's negative 5. Our b value goes on the bottom, which is negative 4. So the top is negative. So that means I've got one negative and one positive. So I need them to have a difference of 4, so 1 and 5. The 5 is negative, the 1 is positive. Negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. Negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4. So we write it in factored form, and I do want you to write it in factored form. Even though some of you will probably see what's going on, I want you to write it in factored form. Now we can use the zero product property. Zero product property says that either x minus 5 has to equal 0 or x plus 1 has to equal 0. Add 5 to both sides, so x is equal to 5. Or subtract 1 from both sides, x is equal to negative 1. So those are our two solutions. So if I plug either of those values into my original equation, x squared minus 4x minus 5, it's going to give me a true solution. So just to do it, 5 squared is 25, minus 4 times 5 is 20, minus 5, that does equal 0, it works. Negative 1 squared is 1, plus negative 4 times negative 1, that's plus 4, minus 5, that equals 0, it checks out as well. Okay, so you can check these just like you could factoring to make sure that you have the right solution, or the right solutions in this case. Right? So step 1, make sure it's in standard form. If you have a trinomial, if you have an a squared plus ax squared plus bx plus c. So when we look at the next one, notice the next one isn't in that form. We've got x squared plus x equals 10. Because I have an a value, a b value, and a c value, first thing we need to do is set it equal to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract 10 from both sides. When I do that, I've got 3x squared plus x minus 10 is equal to 0. Can't combine anything. But now I have it in that standard form that we like to have it in. Now we can go ahead and do the x method. Again, remember it's a times c. So that's negative 30. The b value is on the bottom, which is 1. 1's a negative, 1's a positive. So I'm looking for factors of 30 that have a difference of 1. 2 and 15, that don't work. 3 and 10, that don't work. 5 and 6, there it is. So 5 and 6. 6 is positive. 5 is negative. Negative 5 times 6 is negative 30. Negative 5 plus 6 is 1. It works. So that's x minus 5 and x plus 6. But that doesn't work because that gives me x squared. So remember, you have to divide this by your a value. So when I rewrite this, that's 3x minus 5 because 5 over 3 doesn't reduce. And that's x plus 2. Go ahead and finish it off now using the zero product property. Find the solutions using the zero product property. So 3x minus 5 equals 0. Add 5. Divide by 3. X equals 5/3. Or x plus 2 equals 0. Subtract 2. X equals negative 2. Now your two solutions. Key to this problem is making sure that you put it in standard form first. Make sure that you set it equal to 0. They need to be set equal to 0 before you do your factoring. And again, I do want to see the factored form. And this is a must. I need to see that factored form. Even though the solution is there, or the opposite of the solution is there. If you look at this, and I look at that and compare it to my solutions. It's just the opposite of what's sitting there. Negative 5/3, 5/3. 6 over 3 is 2. The opposite of 2 is negative 2. But I want to see it in factored form because everybody always forgets to do the opposite. Okay, let's look at this one. So we got x squared equals 5x. So I've got an a and a b value, don't have a c value. Still going to set it equal to 0. First step needs to be to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 5x's from both sides. X squared minus 5x then equals 0. What do I do with this one? What's the first rule of factoring? Take out a GCF. What's the greatest common factor for this? Number-wise, they don't have one. Letter-wise, x. If I take an x out of x squared, I'm left with x. If I take an x out of negative 5x, I'm left with negative 5. Now we've got the zero product property. So if you have an a and a b value, it's GCF all the way. A and a b value, GCF all the way. So x equals 0, or x minus 5 equals 0. X is equal to 5. There are your two solutions. Comes down to being able to factor. Hopefully the factoring is going well. So if you have an a and a b value, that's what kind of goes. Now it says solve this by factoring. Because it says solve by factoring, you would do that. If it doesn't say solve by factoring, we did this. This is like one we did on Friday, right? If it didn't say solve by factoring, I would solve this using the square root method. Just take the square root of it. It's positive and negative 6. Take the square root of both sides. Since it wants us to do it by factoring, we need to set it equal to 0. So subtract 36 from both sides. Now that's a difference of squares. So remember we talked about a squared minus b squared. That's a minus b times a plus b. So the square root of x squared is x. The square root of 36 is not 36. It's 6. So that's x plus 6, x minus 6. X plus 6, x minus 6 equals 0. Whatever. Now, honestly, what makes that 0? Negative 6. And if you can do this in your head, what makes that 0? 6. Do it in your head. If you need to write down x plus 6 equals 0, subtract 6. Have at it. You should be getting to the point where you can look at that and say, negative 6 makes that 0, 6 makes... It's just the opposite of what's ever there. That's all it is. If you can do that in your head, do that in your head. Okay? Save yourself some time. There's no sense in doing that piece of it if you get it and understand it. Okay? So that's the big thing for today, is making sure that you factor and you're able to solve equations by factoring. So you get to work on your factoring skills today. There is some review on there as well. If you have questions as you're going along, please ask. Get this done. This is the last homework assignment you have this week. Tomorrow is a catch-up day, meaning you'll get done any assignments that you don't have done. You'll take care of tests that you need to take care of. Or you'll work on other homework if you don't have any math and all of your math is caught up. Okay? Assignments right there. Get yourselves going.